August 1941. Deep inside Berlin, teleprinters clattered as encoded orders left the High Command, direct communications between Adolf Hitler's headquarters and his field marshals across occupied Europe. Each message was shielded by a new cipher machine, more complex than Enigma. It used 12 wheels, not 3, producing billions of combinations. To the German engineers at Lorenz AG, it was unbreakable. To the British listening posts, it was simply tunny, a stream of nonsense bursting over the airwaves. At the same moment, in England, a 24-year-old clerk named William Tutte sat in a drafty office at Bletchley Park, the same secret facility that housed Alan Turing. Unlike Turing, Tutte wasn't a celebrated mathematician from Cambridge, at least not yet. He'd grown up in modest conditions in Newmarket, worked as a trainee accountant, and studied chemistry and mathematics part-time before winning a scholarship to Cambridge. When war broke out, he joined the government code and cipher school, assigned to the lesser-known research section, a handful of civilians facing the new enemy cipher traffic. At first, the intercept stations at Knockholt and Scarborough had no idea what they were hearing. The traffic didn't match Enigma. It was longer, structured differently, and transmitted in 5-bit Bordeaux code, used by teleprinters rather than Morse operators. The messages came in pairs, one encrypted, one seemingly similar, but with differences. Analysts called them depths. It was one of these paired transmissions that would change Tutte's life and the course of the Code War. In August 1941, a German operator accidentally sent the same long message twice, using the same machine settings, but with minor edits, an error fatal to any cipher's security. The two intercepts landed at Bletchley, labeled QEP and QEQ. A veteran linguist, John Tiltman, quickly recovered the German plaintext by exploiting the repetition. He handed the pure ciphertext strings, 5,000 characters of patternless symbols, to Tutte's section with a challenge. Could they deduce the machine that produced it? What Tutte did next bordered on the impossible. With no captured hardware, no clue to the wiring, and no precedent, he treated the cipher as a mathematical organism. By comparing sequences, he saw statistical beats recurring every so many characters. Those rhythms hinted at wheel patterns, just as a forensic accountant detects fraud by spotting repeating numbers hidden in a ledger. For weeks he filled sheets with pencil marks, ruling out coincidences. Gradually the structure revealed itself. 12 wheels, each with a unique number of positions, 41, 31, 29, 26, 23, and so on, two sets working together to mask teleprinter impulses. Tutte deduced not only the count, but even the logical functions connecting them, essentially reverse engineering the Lorenz SZ40 machine by pure thought. By early 1942, the research section could reproduce Lorenz encipherment on paper. Without ever touching the German device, they had built its twin. That insight meant the British could, in theory, read Hitler's highest-level messages in real time, if they could automate the analysis. This was the moment when Bletchley engineers created Colossus, the world's first large-scale electronic computer, to accelerate the process. Tutte's theoretical blueprint made Colossus possible. Colossus, in turn, made strategic intelligence possible. But in August 1941, none of that existed yet. There was only a quiet, methodical young man surrounded by reams of symbols, applying the same disciplined logic he once used to balance accounting ledgers, now repurposed to expose the secrets of a regime. He never asked for recognition, and almost no one at Bletchley even knew his name. Yet within months, the Allies would be reading the thoughts of Hitler's generals before their own staff officers saw them. By early 1942, the British Government Code and Cipher School had quietly achieved what seemed impossible, the mathematical reconstruction of the Lorenz cipher machine, without ever seeing one. The discovery was so secret that even most of Bletchley Park's staff had no idea it existed. Only a few dozen people knew of the operation, hidden behind the code name Tunny. For months after William Tutte's breakthrough, he and the small research section led by Major Ralph Tester refined their understanding of the cipher's inner structure. Each intercepted message from German teleprinter lines, usually thousands of 5-bit impulses, provided new patterns to analyze. Tutte charted them by hand, creating elaborate grids to trace how the cipher's 12 wheels interacted. He found that the first 5 wheels controlled what he called the chi stream, the next 5 formed the psi stream, and the final 2, known as motor wheels, governed how the others advanced. This insight was revolutionary. The Lorenz cipher was not random. It followed a mechanical rhythm that could, in theory, be predicted. Inside Block F, Bletchley's testery was set up, named after Major Tester, where linguists, cryptanalysts, and mathematicians began using Tutte's framework to actually read Lorenz messages. They developed a system called breaking in depth, identifying repeated key patterns and using statistical tests to estimate wheel settings. Every day, encrypted traffic arrived from listening posts like Knockholt and Beaumanoir. Operators recorded German high command communications transmitted over fish networks, named after marine species. Lorenz was the most important, tunny. Others, like Thrasher or Sturgeon, referred to lower-level machines. Tutte's logic allowed the testery to exploit these transmissions, but manual methods were painfully slow. Each message required endless sheets of graph paper, pencils, and patience. To find a single wheel setting could take weeks. The workload was overwhelming. By spring 1942, over 100 analysts and clerks worked in shifts trying to keep up. They managed to break about 1 in every 10 intercepted Lorenz messages, still a stunning success considering the cipher's complexity. But as traffic volume increased, it became clear that no human team could process it fast enough. Something had to change. The key bottleneck was testing wheel settings, a repetitive mechanical process ideal for automation. In late 1942, a young post office engineer named Tommy Flowers heard about the tunny problem from colleagues at Bletchley. Flowers was a pioneer in electronic switching using vacuum tubes. While most experts considered electronics too unreliable for continuous computation, Flowers disagreed. He proposed building an electronic machine that could simulate Tutte's theoretical Lorenz structure and test thousands of possible settings per second. Bletchley's managers were skeptical. The idea of using hundreds of fragile valves in one system seemed unrealistic. Even Alan Turing's earlier bomber machines were electromechanical. But Flowers persisted, convinced that Tutte's mathematical blueprint provided the perfect roadmap for automation. By the end of 1943, working at the post office research station at Dollis Hill, Flowers and his small team designed Colossus, the world's first programmable electronic computer. It used over 1,500 vacuum tubes, optical readers for punch tape, and Boolean logic circuits, all based on Tutte's analysis of the Lorenz cipher. In essence, Tutte's equations became the machine's brain. When the first Colossus was delivered to Bletchley Park in January 1944, the effect was immediate. What once took weeks could now be done in hours. Messages that would have been discarded for being too complex were suddenly within reach. Tutte continued refining his theoretical work, while the testery, now joined by the Newmanry, a separate section run by mathematician Max Newman, operated the Colossus systems around the clock. Together, the two units formed a seamless pipeline. Tutte and the researchers deduced wheel logic, Newman's engineers mechanized the process, and the linguists in the testery interpreted the German messages that emerged. The decrypted Lorenz traffic revealed Hitler's direct communications with his generals, including operations on the Eastern Front and strategies for defending occupied Europe. This intelligence was of higher command value than Enigma ever produced. But no one outside those rooms knew Tutte's name. His work was signed Research Section, buried under layers of classification. He was never photographed, never publicly credited. The quiet young man who once balanced accounting ledgers had, through sheer logic, helped invent the foundation of modern computing and given the Allies a priceless window into the enemy's mind. By late 1942, Tutte's cipher diagrams filled entire walls of the research huts. Each pattern, each alignment, was a silent victory. The accountant-turned-cryptanalyst had done something extraordinary. He had cracked a Nazi code no one even knew existed. By early 1944, the British decryption system that had grown from William Tutte's equations was in full operation. The first Colossus computer, installed at Bletchley Park that January, transformed cryptanalysis from an intellectual puzzle into an industrial process. Each day the machine's reels of punched paper tape whirred through streams of intercepted German teleprinter traffic, seeking the patterns that revealed the Lorenz machine's wheel settings. Once identified, human operators in the testery could decode the messages almost immediately. For the first time in the war, the Allies were reading the thoughts of Hitler's highest commanders in near real time. The Lorenz cipher carried the most sensitive material in the Third Reich. Personal directives from Hitler to generals on every front, intelligence briefings and supply movements. Many of these communications involved the Eastern Front, where the German army was struggling against Soviet advances. The information helped British and American planners estimate the true strength of German divisions, and it gave Soviet command a clearer picture of the enemy's intentions, sometimes even before the Wehrmacht received orders from Berlin. Tutte's achievement was unlike anything seen before in military intelligence. He had deduced the internal wiring of a machine he never laid eyes on, using nothing but paper, pencil, and logic. Each of his discoveries, the number of wheels, the irregular stepping pattern, the relationship between the chi and psi streams, fed directly into the engineering principles that Tommy Flowers used to design Colossus. It was the first time mathematics and electronics had merged into a single weapon. The process inside Bletchley was methodical, but astonishingly fast. The intercept stations in England and the Middle East relayed daily traffic to the code-breaking center. Operators prepared tapes by converting the 5-bit radio signals into punched holes, then fed them through Colossus at speeds of 5,000 characters per second. The computer compared these with hypothesized key streams, searching for correlations that indicated the correct wheel settings. When a promising pattern emerged, the testery team took over, reconstructing the message in plain-text German. Translators and intelligence officers summarized the contents, which were then forwarded to London under the strictest secrecy. Among the most significant breakthroughs came in the months leading to D-Day. In the spring of 1944, Colossus machines were processing thousands of characters of Lorenz traffic every hour. One decrypted message revealed that the Germans had not expected the Allies to land in Normandy, still believing the main invasion would strike farther north near Calais. This insight confirmed that Hitler's deception by Allied Operation Fortitude was working, a result that directly influenced the invasion's timing and location. The Lorenz decrypts also exposed the scale of Germany's collapse on the Eastern Front. In late 1944, messages between the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht and field commanders revealed severe fuel shortages and troop exhaustion. The information was quietly shared with Allied strategists, giving them confidence to maintain pressure on both fronts. Despite these monumental contributions, very few inside Bletchley Park knew who was responsible for the discovery that made it all possible. Tutte remained in the background, rarely speaking about his work. Those who met him described him as polite, modest, and quietly obsessive about logic problems. To his colleagues in the research section, he was simply Bill. The war, however, was changing faster than anyone could have anticipated. As the Allies advanced through France and the Low Countries, intercepted German traffic began to diminish. Field units switched to shorter-range ciphers, while the Lorenz network retreated into Germany itself. Yet the workload at Bletchley did not slow. New versions of Colossus were built, Mark II machines with over 2,400 valves, to keep up with the evolving encryption settings. By the end of 1944, 10 Colossi were running day and night, and every new batch of messages confirmed the accuracy of Tutte's theoretical model. The system never broke. Even when German operators adjusted wheel patterns or message formats, the mathematicians in the research section could adapt within days. Tutte's understanding of the cipher's logic was so complete that he could predict how changes in the machine would appear in the intercepted code. By early 1945, as the war entered its final phase, Bletchley Park had decrypted more than 63 million characters of Lorenz traffic. The information contributed directly to Allied victory in Europe, shortening the war and saving countless lives. Yet all of it remained secret. Tutte and his team could not tell anyone, not their families, not their universities, not even one another, beyond what was necessary for their tasks. Every document was stamped "Most Secret." Every room was locked and guarded. When the war ended that spring, Tutte's contribution was sealed away in government archives, classified for over 3 decades. The machines were dismantled, the notes burned, and the story of the accountant who cracked a Nazi code disappeared into silence. He returned quietly to civilian life, his wartime work unmentioned in any public record. To the world, he was just another mathematician, another graduate trying to find a post-war career. But inside Bletchley Park, those who knew understood that William Tutte had achieved something unmatched. He had solved one of the most complex cryptographic systems ever built, using only logic, patience, and the mind of an accountant. After the war ended in May 1945, the operations that had taken place inside Bletchley Park were dismantled almost overnight. The huts were cleared, the machines destroyed, and the thousands of men and women who had worked there were sworn once again to silence. The official secrets they carried were considered so sensitive that the British government forbade any public discussion of code breaking for decades. William Tutte, the man whose logic had revealed the structure of the Lorenz cipher, simply returned to civilian life with no recognition and no documentation of what he had done. For Tutte, the transition to peace was abrupt. He had spent years immersed in a world of logic, probability, and secrecy. Now, in the summer of 1945, he faced the challenge of returning to normal work without ever being able to mention the single greatest achievement of his life. His wartime colleagues dispersed across the country. Some went back to teaching or academia, others joined government posts in London. Tutte quietly returned to Cambridge to complete his studies in mathematics. No one there knew that he had helped shorten the war by creating the theoretical foundation for the world's first electronic computer. In the late 1940s, he accepted an academic position in Canada, joining the faculty at the University of Toronto. There he began what would become a distinguished career as a mathematician, focusing on graph theory, a branch of mathematics concerned with networks and connections. His work would go on to influence areas like computer science, telecommunications, and chemistry, though at the time, few realized that his early exposure to cryptographic systems had shaped his mathematical intuition. The precision and patience he had developed while untangling the Lorenz cipher were now being applied to abstract structures of nodes and edges. Back in Britain, almost everything connected to the Lorenz project was destroyed. The 10 Colossus computers that had been built between 1943 and 1945 were dismantled on government orders, their parts reused or scrapped. The official reasoning was that the technology remained sensitive. In reality, few officials fully understood what those machines represented. They were not just tools of war, but prototypes for a new kind of computation. The decision to destroy them erased a vital piece of technological history. The secrecy also meant that the men and women who had made those breakthroughs could not use their experience in the post-war scientific boom. Engineers like Tommy Flowers received little credit and struggled for funding. Tutte, living in Canada, built a new identity as a pure mathematician. He published hundreds of papers on combinatorics, eventually becoming one of the field's leading figures. But even as his academic reputation grew, he never spoke of the code he had once broken. When asked about his wartime service, he would smile politely and change the subject. Inside the British intelligence community, the value of the Lorenz decrypts remained a closely guarded secret. The project had given the Allies insight into Hitler's command decisions and had confirmed that deception campaigns such as Operation Fortitude were working. Those messages had also provided evidence of Germany's desperate state in 1944 and early 1945. Some historians later argued that these decrypts were as strategically valuable as those produced from Enigma. Yet, because the Lorenz work was even more highly classified, almost no one outside government circles knew it had existed at all. For more than 30 years, the world believed that Alan Turing's Enigma work represented the full story of wartime code-breaking. The contribution of Tutte and the Lorenz team was buried under layers of classification. When the first books about Bletchley Park began appearing in the 1970s, Tutte's name was absent. The Colossus computers were described only vaguely, if at all, and their connection to Lorenz remained a mystery. It was not until 1974 that the truth began to surface. The British government declassified portions of the wartime intelligence records, revealing that there had been another code system beyond Enigma, one used by the highest levels of the Nazi command, and that it had been solved independently by mathematicians at Bletchley. When the details of the Lorenz cipher and the Colossus machines became public, researchers began piecing together the story. Gradually, William Tutte's central role came into view. Journalists and historians were astonished. Without access to the actual machine, Tutte had reconstructed its logical structure entirely by deduction. In doing so, he had anticipated concepts later used in computer architecture and information theory. What Alan Turing had done for Enigma, Tutte had done for Lorenz, and arguably at a higher level of complexity. By that time, Tutte was in his 50s, still teaching in Canada, and still unaware that his name was about to reappear in history books. When reporters reached out to him for comment, he responded with characteristic modesty. He said he had simply been part of a team, doing what needed to be done. But those who had studied the decrypted records understood the magnitude of his contribution. He had not just solved a cipher. He had reverse-engineered an entire cryptographic machine through logic alone. As the story spread, computer historians realized that Tutte's work on Lorenz had indirectly ushered in the electronic age. The Colossus, built to automate his mathematical model, had demonstrated that logic could be mechanized and scaled, the same principle that underpins modern computing. Yet Tutte himself never sought recognition for that connection. He considered his wartime service an obligation, not an achievement to advertise. Decades after the war, as new generations of researchers learned about Bletchley Park, Tutte's name began appearing alongside Turing's in discussions of wartime innovation. But the contrast between them remained stark. Turing became an icon, the tragic genius of code-breaking. Tutte remained a quiet academic, a man who preferred equations to fame. His story stood as a reminder that some of the greatest advances in history come not from ambition, but from the patient work of those who solve problems simply because they can. By the time William Tutte's wartime work was finally declassified, more than 3 decades had passed since he had first cracked the Lorenz cipher. The world had changed completely. Computers, once built in secret for code-breaking, now filled offices, universities, and homes. The technology that Tutte's equations had helped to inspire had reshaped civilization, yet almost no one knew the man behind the logic. When his story began to surface in the late 1970s, it surprised even his colleagues in academia. To them, he was a respected mathematician, a pioneer in graph theory and combinatorics, not a codebreaker who had helped defeat Nazi Germany. In 1977, the British government officially acknowledged the existence of the Colossus computers, and for the first time the public learned that Enigma had not been the only German cipher broken at Bletchley Park. Historians studying the newly released archives were stunned by the complexity of the Lorenz system and the scale of the operation required to break it. They found Tutte's name buried in internal memos, alongside fragments of the diagrams he had drawn in 1941 and 1942. What had once been dismissed as the work of a large anonymous team now clearly pointed to one mind, the quiet mathematician who had reconstructed an entire enemy machine using nothing but intercepted data. Recognition came slowly. Tutte never sought it. By the time journalists tracked him down in Canada, he was in his 60s, still teaching and still reluctant to talk about the past. When asked how he managed to deduce the Lorenz structure without ever seeing the device, he gave a simple answer. It was logical deduction, the only thing we could do. That understatement captured his personality. There was no grand speech, no nostalgia, only the same humility that had defined him at Bletchley Park. In the 1990s, as computing history gained renewed attention, Tutte began to receive formal honors. He was made a Fellow of the Royal Society in 1987 and appointed to the Order of Canada in 2001. Universities invited him to speak about his wartime experiences, though he remained measured and factual, avoiding drama or self-promotion. When Bletchley Park itself was restored as a museum, Tutte's work on Lorenz became one of its central exhibits. Visitors could see the recreated Colossus computer running in real time, its paper tape feeding through the optical reader, just as it had in 1944, a living monument to the collaboration between logic and engineering that had changed history. The scale of his achievement only grew clearer with time. The Lorenz cipher, used for Hitler's highest-level communications, was several orders of magnitude more complex than Enigma. Its 12 wheels generated billions of possible settings. Breaking it required more than cryptographic skill. It required theoretical insight into how information behaves. Tutte's reconstruction effectively created the first mathematical model of a digital communication system, years before information theory was formally established by Claude Shannon in the United States. In retrospect, Tutte's work represented a turning point not just in wartime intelligence, but in the history of computing itself. Those who worked with him later in life said he remained unchanged by the attention. He was still soft-spoken, still happiest working alone at a chalkboard, still dismissive of celebrity. When his students learned that he had once helped crack Nazi codes, they were astonished. Many could not reconcile the humble professor in front of them with the man who had deciphered Hitler's secret messages. Tutte rarely discussed it, insisting that it had been a collective effort and that others, like the engineers who built Colossus, deserved equal credit. He retired from teaching in the 1990s, but continued publishing papers well into his later years. When he died in 2002, obituaries across Britain and Canada described him as the man who cracked Hitler's most secret code. For many readers, it was the first time they had ever heard his name. Some accounts called him the greatest cryptanalyst of the 20th century, a title he would have found uncomfortable. In the years that followed, Tutte's story was retold in documentaries, exhibitions, and academic studies. Historians recognized that his reconstruction of the Lorenz machine had been one of the purest demonstrations of human logic ever accomplished. He had taken lines of meaningless text, a stream of dots and dashes intercepted from the air, and, through reasoning alone, uncovered the hidden machinery behind it. Without his work, Colossus might never have been built, and the Allies might never have had access to the intelligence that shaped the final years of the war. Tutte's journey from a small-town accountant's apprentice to one of history's greatest codebreakers is one of the least celebrated transformations of the Second World War. He never commanded troops or designed weapons. His battlefield was a notepad. His weapon was logic. In a war defined by machines and destruction, he proved that the power of thought could be just as decisive. Today, his legacy lives quietly in every computer, every encrypted message, and every algorithm that processes information. The principles he uncovered, pattern, structure, repetition, and logic, remain the foundation of modern digital systems. The Lorenz cipher that once carried Hitler's commands is long gone, but the mind that unraveled it continues to echo through the world's technology. William Tutte never called himself a hero, but history would later correct that modesty. The accountant who cracked a Nazi code had, without knowing it, helped to invent the future.